The shadows of Umiri. In the village of Umiri, nestled in the heart of Delta State, lived Mr. Peter and his wife, Neka. They were known as a humble and hardworking couple who cherished their two children, Amoka and Ibuka. Their modest home, made of weathered bricks and a rusted zinc roof, sat at the edge of the village near the dense forest that whispered with tales of spirits and mysteries. Mr. Peter, a farmer, was the life of their small household. He had a booming laugh and a gift for storytelling that kept the family entertained on quiet nights. Neka, his wife, was a trader who sold cassava, yam, and smoked fish at the village market. She was a resourceful woman, admired for her sharp tongue and her determination to provide for her family. Amoka, their firstborn, was a lively 14-year-old who adored her father's stories and often helped her mother in the market. Ibuka, just 9, was mischievous and full of energy, always chasing after lizards or climbing the ancient Iroko tree that stood tall behind their house. Though life was simple, it was filled with love, laughter, and the occasional squabble over who would fetch water from the village well or whose turn it was to wash the family's only bicycle. But in Umiri, peace was often fragile, and whispers of the supernatural were never far from the villagers' lips. It was a humid evening, and the family gathered outside under the sprawling mango tree. Mr. Peter, with his pipe in hand, recounted tales of the spirits said to roam the forest at night. "Do you know why the old Iroko tree stands alone?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Ibuka leaned forward, his small hands clutching his knees. "Why, Papa?" "It is said that the tree houses the soul of a warrior," Mr. Peter began, lowering his voice dramatically. "A warrior so fierce that even death couldn't claim him. They say his spirit guards the village, but only if we respect the ways of the gods." Amoka rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "Papa, are you sure it's not just a tree?" Mr. Peter chuckled and tapped her forehead playfully. "Oh, Amoka, you are too much like your mother, always questioning everything." Neka, who had been peeling yam for the evening meal, glanced up and shook her head. "Leave her alone, Peter. Not everyone believes in these tales of yours." "It's not just tales," he said, pretending to be offended. "The elders speak of these things for a reason." Maybe," Neka replied with a smirk. "But right now, the only spirit I'm interested in is the one that will help me cook this yam." They all laughed, the sound carrying into the night. But life in Umiri took a dark turn the day Mr. Peter fell ill. It began suddenly. One morning, as he prepared to head to the farm, he clutched his chest and collapsed at the doorstep. Amoka and Ibuka screamed as Neka rushed to his side. His breathing was labored, and his once strong frame seemed frail and fragile. "Amoka, run to the herbalist," Neka ordered, her voice trembling. "Tell him it's urgent." Amoka sprinted through the narrow paths of the village, her heart pounding. By the time she returned with the herbalist, Mr. Peter's condition had worsened. Despite the herbalist's best efforts, Mr. Peter passed away 3 days later. The village mourned his death, and the family was plunged into grief. "Your father was a good man," the elders told Amoka and Ibuka. "The gods will watch over you now." But the gods seemed silent. Neka changed after Peter's death. At first, it was subtle. She became quieter, spending hours staring at the horizon. Then came the whispers. Neighbors began to notice that Neka often left the house late at night, returning before dawn with baskets covered in cloth. One evening, Neka came home with bags of food, new clothes, and even a shiny gold bangle that glinted in the sunlight. "Mama, where did you get all this?" Amoka asked, her eyes wide. "God has blessed us," Neka replied curtly. The next day, she announced that they were moving to a bigger house in the heart of the village. The house was unlike anything they had ever lived in: painted walls, a spacious compound, and even a well with clean water. "This is our new home," Neka declared. "But there's one rule: no one enters my room without permission." Amoka and Ebuka exchanged puzzled glances but said nothing. At night, strange sounds came from Neka's room, low murmurs and the faint sound of something scraping against the floor. Amoka's curiosity grew, but fear kept her silent. Then, one night, Amoka woke to find her mother standing over her bed, holding a clay pot filled with something dark and sticky. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling. Neka's eyes were wild. "Hush, my daughter. The gods demand your obedience." And so began the nightmare that would shatter the lives of Amoka and Ebuka. Amoka froze in her bed, staring at her mother, who stood clutching the clay pot. The room was dimly lit by the faint glow of a lantern in the corner, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Mama, what's going on?" Amoka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Neka's eyes glinted, and for a moment, Amoka didn't recognize the woman who had always comforted her during storms and kissed her forehead when she was sick. This was something else. "Go back to sleep," Neka said coldly. She placed the clay pot on the floor, adjusted the wrapper tied around her chest, and left the room without another word. Amoka sat up, her heart pounding. She looked over at Ebuka, who was sound asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. She debated whether to wake him but decided against it. The following morning, Amoka noticed that her mother was unusually cheerful. She hummed while preparing breakfast, her movements light and almost carefree. "Good morning, Mama," Amoka greeted cautiously. "Good morning, my daughter," Neka replied, her tone unnervingly sweet. "Did you sleep well?" Amoka hesitated. "Yes, Mama. Thank you." Neka smiled, but there was something off about it, too wide, too forced. Amoka glanced at Ebuka, who was busy devouring his meal, oblivious to the tension in the air. As the days went by, Neka's behavior became more erratic. She spent hours locked in her room, and the strange sounds continued. Amoka tried to ignore them, but her curiosity grew with each passing night. One evening, when Neka left the house to visit a friend, Amoka saw her chance. "Ebuka," she whispered, nudging her brother. He looked up from his drawing on the floor. "What is it, Amoka?" "Mama's room," she said. "We need to see what's inside." Ebuka's eyes widened. "Are you crazy?" "Mama said we shouldn't." "I know," Amoka interrupted. "But something's wrong. Don't you feel it?" Ebuka hesitated but eventually nodded. "Okay. But if she catches us?" "She won't," Amoka assured him. They crept to Neka's room, their bare feet silent on the cool floor. Amoka turned the knob slowly, her breath catching when it clicked open. The room was dim, lit by a single candle on a small wooden table. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and something metallic, blood. In the center of the room was a large clay pot, similar to the one Neka had held that night. Strange markings were etched into the walls, and on the floor was a small shrine adorned with feathers, bones, and a blood-stained machete. "What is this?" Ebuka whispered, clutching Amoka's arm. "I don't know," Amoka replied, her voice shaking. She stepped closer to the shrine, her eyes drawn to a bundle of red cloth in the corner. When she pulled it open, she gasped. It was filled with human teeth and fingernails. "Amoka, let's go," Ebuka begged, tears welling up in his eyes. But before they could move, the door slammed shut behind them. Neka stood in the doorway, her face a mask of fury. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded, her voice like thunder. Amoka and Ebuka froze, their fear paralyzing them. We were just," Amoka stammered. "Just what?" Neka snarled, stepping closer. Her presence seemed larger, darker, as if the shadows themselves were alive around her. "Mama, what is all this?" Amoka asked, finding her voice. "Why are you doing this?" Neka laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down their spines. You wouldn't understand, child. This is how we survive now. Your father's death, it wasn't natural. The gods demand sacrifices, and I will not lose what I've gained. Amoka's stomach turned as realization dawned. You sacrificed Papa. Neka's eyes gleamed. It was for the greater good. He would have wanted us to thrive. You're lying. Amoka shouted, tears streaming down her face. Neka raised her hand, and Amoka and Ebuka were thrown backward by an invisible force. They hit the wall hard, gasping for air as the room spun around them. Amoka's mind raced as she struggled to her feet. She glanced at Ebuka, who was clutching his head, his face pale. Mama, please, Amoka pleaded. You don't have to do this. We're your children. Neka hesitated for a moment, but then her face hardened. The gods don't care about love. Only power. She raised her hands again, chanting words Amoka didn't understand. The walls of the room seemed to close in, and the shadows grew darker. Amoka looked around desperately. Her eyes fell on the blood-stained machete near the shrine. Summoning all her courage, she lunged for it, her fingers closing around the hilt. Amoka, no! Neka screamed, but it was too late. With a cry of desperation, Amoka swung the machete, striking the clay pot. It shattered instantly, releasing a deafening wail that echoed through the house. The shadows dissipated, and Neka collapsed to the floor, clutching her chest. The markings on the walls faded, and the oppressive air lifted. Amoka dropped the machete, breathing heavily. She ran to Ebuka, who was sobbing quietly. It's over, she whispered, holding him close. The villagers found Neka's lifeless body the next morning, her once beautiful face twisted in agony. They whispered of curses and forbidden rituals but said little to the children. Amoka and Ebuka were taken in by their aunts, who lived in a neighboring village. Though they were safe, the memories of that night haunted them. Years later, Amoka would tell the story to her own children, warning them of the dangers of greed and the price of disobedience to the natural order. In the village of Umri, the shadows of that night lingered, a chilling reminder that not all spirits were meant to be summoned, and not all secrets were meant to be kept.